how do you actually manage rejection?
Apart from crying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is actually one of the core founder traits, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm yet to see a successful founder who does not have resilience in bucket loads, right? Yeah, sure. It was just like our Series B had a 40 something rejections for our capital raise, but the amount of times we've lost customer deals, or the product didn't meet customer expectations in the early days, or a senior leadership hire hasn't worked out, and you've got to like have that conversation, and that feels very rejecting for both parties. It is a proper lesson in resilience and just getting knocked down and getting back up again for a decade.
Chris, welcome to the first podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So we always like to set the scene here and just get the founder to intro briefly themselves and also talk through what it is Go1.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Chris. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Go1, and Go1 is probably the largest professional development and learning marketplace now in the world.
And we're obviously recording here from Brisbane today. And we always like to talk about early upbringings of founders just to see if there's like these early inclinations of maybe that entrepreneurial spirit. But maybe do you want to highlight, what did an early upbringing look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in Brisbane, proudly born and raised. I think my family was a fairly middle-class nuclear family dynamic. My dad was an engineer. My mum was extremely creative. And so you probably start to see some of the different components of this sort of entrepreneurship skill set coming out there. But if I think about like my early childhood and the influences there on like the decision to start a business and do some other things that I've done, I think it's probably more around actually just the sort of encouragement to actually do something. My dad's a bit of an eco warrior, and even now in his 70s, he's like writing letters to council and all those sorts of things whenever he sees injustice. And so, he really instilled some of those things about, I think it was the old saying, like, I used to complain about why no one did anything, and then I remembered that I am somebody or something along those lines.
Yep.
And so that was like drilled into me as a kid. And so I think, fairly middle class, stereotypical Australian Brisbane sort of nuclear family, but then with an element of like, actually, no, you only got one life, actually make it matter and take some risks. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about the story of you guys with Go1 is it started at such an early age in some ways.
We've known each other for 20 years. Gosh, that's scary when you think about it that way.
and we speak to founders, and like some founders go through the motions of, university, some form of postgrad, maybe go into consulting, hate consulting, start like trying their own thing. But you guys were really trying things like at the really early formative years.
From partway through high school.
Yeah. And what I guess drove that? Was there any kind of moments that you can kind of remember at high school where you were like, okay, I want to do my own thing here, and this was the trajectory that I want to be on?
I think it's a mix of just like core impatience, of like wanting to get out there and try some new things. So there's definitely an element of like impatience and a just kind of like core belief that there is, more to life and more to the education system than just, academic pursuits. And that also reflects why the type of business that we founded is the way it is. But I think it's always been core to our personalities to kind of be impatient to learn, try new things, fail fast, learn and, capture opportunities for sure.
And was education important to you? I'm assuming, just giving outsider looking in, based off your profile, I'm assuming it was.
So it was in a sort of roundabout way. So I'd say if you asked me 20 years ago, was education the area that I would choose to spend, the next 2 decades of my career on, I would have probably said no. In fact, my first degree was in theme park design. I think I'm probably the only person in Australia still to have created their own degree in theme park design. Great. And then I ended up transferring to humanitarian constitutional law, big shift there. Yep. But then I ended up living in Haiti for a while after the earthquake in 2011. And whilst I'd had an appreciation for the kind of transformative power of education prior to that, working in the K-12 education system there really, really hit home for me of like, actually, no, this is probably the single biggest lever in history to like change economic and sort of social outcomes. And that's where like really was cemented in this sort of 2011, 2012 period.
Yeah. Maybe just double click on that. Post university, again, outside of looking in, it seems like you've had this really remarkable kind of trajectory in this small space of time where it was like, there was Shanghai in there was Hong Kong in there. South
New York for a
Africa,
while, yeah,
New
South
York,
Africa.
etc.
Yeah.
And then there's
Yeah.
Haiti. Do you just
Yeah.
want to kind of walk through those steps and how they eventuated?
Yes, I mean, I think maybe looking back on it, it can seem sort of linear.
Yeah.
But I think maybe going back to the high school experience as well, it's more about kind of serendipity, and I think having the courage to like capture things when they come along.
Yeah.
It's not some linear journey where I've been like, okay, this is where I want to be in 10 years. I have to do these 3 or 4 things. So, you know, we're studying law at school at university at that point in time at Griffith. And then one of my friends actually was moving to Haiti after the earthquake, invited me to come with them for a couple of months.
Yep.
I was like, sure, why not? As you can imagine, my parents were not particularly pleased that was my life decision at that point in time when I was still studying law. But that really set off a whole new sort of trajectory and sort of thought process for me. And then something like South Africa, I was an associate at the Constitutional Court, their sort of Supreme Court, because that's the only court in the world, apart from the Israeli Supreme Court, that admits foreign lawyers. And that was because I'd met a South African lawyer during my time in Haiti, and they really recommended this sort of opportunity, and I decided to take it. And it's not one sort of linear pathway. It's, I think, the accumulation of a bunch of perspectives and skills that I think honestly makes a great entrepreneur. And so whilst it's not linear, a lot of it's opportunistic. That sort of skill set, from the legal skill set to the creativity of theme park design, how to tell a great story, which is like a core part of learning, through to education structures and like some of the structural challenge in education funding globally. All of that combines into like, you know, the Go1 experience. Even though it may appear like scattergun and hodgepodge, actually I think those squiggly careers are like so important. And
I, you know, as I was doing my research, I did obviously kind of pinpoint around that Haiti experience because it's so unique and it seems like such an outlier to most people's careers.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique period of time. Yeah.
I mean, like, what sort of impact did that have on you and us? And I guess, you know, how that kind of shaped your thought process around potentially looking at doing something like Go1?
Yeah, so I think all of us and all of the founders came to the focus of professional education from different perspectives. So you had Vu, who was a medical doctor who was having to complete professional development training, and it was clunky and not helpful and having to be done 12 different times for the same thing. You had sort of Andrew, who sort of the previous iteration were running the web development firm and had lots of repeat requests for learning solutions to be built out. Again, kind of custom clunky. And then you had me, who as I had the experience building a not-for-profit in Haiti, and that was physical education supplies. Like that was literally training teachers and students using physical supplies and trying to get them to remote areas. And I think I was then 21 when I sort of spent my largest chunk of time in Haiti. And I think as a naive 21-year-old, I thought that institutions like the UN and all those sorts of things would have the best-in-class systems and, you know, really be able to roll out effectively. And the reality is there's just a lot of challenges, and a lot of those institutions really struggle to deliver training where it's needed in really remote environments and challenging areas. And so I left that experience thinking, well, you know, there has to be a better way of doing it. Don't know what it is, but like there has to be a better way of you're upskilling people for the next phase of their journey, for sure.
And I mean, I think one of the obvious questions for this recording is, you guys have this exceptional like journey in a way that you knew each other at high school. You have this very quick pathway of different divergent experiences coming back together. And I guess the topic that we always speak about on this show is co-founders. Like, how do you find them? How do you find the right mix? We have a lot of early stage founders listening to the show. Some are kind of solo founders and trying to find that additional person or people to find along their journey. Do you think that these kind of diverse, I wouldn't even say backgrounds, because you kind of come from the same sort of upbringings in some ways, but you went away and learned
interests and skill sets,
etc.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is actually like a powerful concoction?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. With a couple of caveats. So, like, I think if you look at the skill sets of the founding group, they're all fundamentally different. Ranging from obviously the other Chris, who's deeply technical, to Vu, who's probably the best salesperson that I've ever met, to then, you know, Andrew, who has one of the strongest strategic minds, and then myself, who's sort of more the operational generalist, the executor, the impact, like those sorts of things. So we all have quite different skill sets. And that I think has been extremely helpful, particularly very early in the journey, because all of us were still at university when we were starting to build out Go1, various time commitments at various points. You sub in for each other at different points in time. Oh, Vu's got an exam. No problem. Like, let's put on that hat and keep going. So I think having co-founders full stop is, I think it'd be so hard to do this on your own, and so much respect for solo founders. Because I think having that network of people who just truly understand what you're going through at any point in time is invaluable. And then having diversity of skill set is also really important, because we're all very flawed individuals, and we all have our gaps, and it's really important to plug in. Now, having said all of that, a co-founder relationship is just like any other relationship in your life, and it requires time, investment, honesty, authenticity, vulnerability. And so you should fully expect that you will need to invest in those relationships over a long period of time, because you will grow and change, and the business grows and changes. And so you really do need to actually like nurture those relationships and like not take them for granted.
Did you guys need validation in those early days? I guess it sounds as if you had like deep experiences and deep conviction on what to do with Go1. But we do speak to founders where they're like, oh, look, I need to speak to my family or potential customers, et cetera, before I take this leap. Was that something that you guys did, or was it an awareness that you needed to do this?
So we knew a problem we wanted to solve, but weren't always 100% on the pathway to get there. And so what is, I think, encapsulated, particularly the early years of the Go1 journey, is a agility and velocity, and like knowing where you want to get, but taking on board pretty fast feedback loops from customers on what's working and what's not working. Like, we started by building a learning management system where there's 600 LMSs in the world. It's a really crowded space with not a huge amount of competitive moat. And we learned pretty quickly within like a couple of months of that, that actually that's not where the magic is. You need to be able to deliver the learning experience where learners and companies are, but actually that's not where the value is in the value chain. And we've just like, particularly in the first, I'd say 2 to 3 years, we just pivoted 2 or 3% again and again and again, and just tacked as we learned new information until we had, what you'd probably call product market fit. In like VC terms.
Do you remember day one of Go1?
I actually don't. I remember like YC experience and those sorts of things, and going through Y Combinator. Because we'd known each other for so long, the beginning of the sort of the Go1 journey was just kind of so organic. Like, it wasn't like we opened the doors on an office or something. It was just like tinkering around and trying to figure things out. So I kind of wish I did, but I don't remember like, the official day one.
Can you actually, I do want to touch on YC actually, because it seems like back then, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that YC, especially for Australian founders, was quite unique. It was early days.
Second Australian company, third max. There wasn't many.
I mean, what drew you to YC?
So at that stage, we had revenue. So I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say about $40,000-$50,000 of sort of ARR. We had the first iteration of the product, but it was still super clunky and not something which you'd be proud of to like have out in the wild. And we were kind of searching for the right platform for us to take the business and the product to the next level. And so we sort of knew of the world of accelerators and those sorts of things, and were of course immediately drawn to kind of YC, its history, its pedigree, the caliber of entrepreneurs that had come out of it. And so we decided, I think it was maybe 2 hours for applications closed, to submit an application. I think I was at my grandmother's house on dial-up internet trying to like fill out the form. Vu was, I think, stuck in hospital, so our YC application video, like a photo of Vu we're holding up there. It's like, so, I wouldn't say it was the most well put together application in the world. But that's not what they look for. So
it's funny, I always hear stories about the founders applying, and it always seems at the last minute. It feels like YC servers must be just cracking at the end.
Oh, no, 100%. I think they did publish the stat a couple of years ago, and it's something like 97% of applications are received in the last 4 hours. I'm pretty sure they did publish it a couple of years ago,
So we actually had a conversation a few months ago with Ned Dwyer from Great Question. Obviously went through YC as well. He gave some really interesting advice around like valuations, etc., and some recommendations for Australian founders like applying for YC. What would be your recommendation, having gone through that process, be to early stage founders?
In terms of the application process
Yeah.
and how. So, I mean, it really depends on what stage the business is. So maybe I'll speak from our experience, and then you can probably take pieces of that are more applicable or not. So fundamentally, what I believe YC looks for is the team, right? Because there's some very famous stories of companies changing their idea and pivoting partway through the program and partway through the sort of the months you spend in California. So fundamentally, I think they look for the team, the caliber of the team dynamics, and some of the attributes of the founders that mean that they will show, I think, resilience, maybe an element of stubbornness and some of those qualities. So whilst things like revenue and traction do help, I think in the application process, fundamentally it's more about how you talk about yourselves and how you demonstrate that you are a sort of founding group that can solve an innumerable number of problems in a short period of time. So then more specifically, like what then does that do? I think for us, the YC experience was mostly about the people. There's no secret sauce. There's no silver bullet. It's not like you come out of 12 weeks and you're this amazing CEO or whatever and you've got it all sorted. But the caliber of the people around you innately pushes you to do better. And the caliber of the founders and of the YC partners just pushes you along and I think just motivates you to a degree that is like pretty special.
Yeah.
Like you're genuinely worried you're going to fall behind because you do these check-ins every week and you have like a ton of founders who are running really hard, solving really interesting problems. And you're like, I've got to move quick.
Yeah.
So the caliber of the people is incredible. From a valuation and capital raising perspective, there's no doubt that the YC badge helps in the capital raising process, but does come with some, caveats around, the valuations of YC companies coming out of the program are generally pretty high. That comes with a certain expectation set, and you may or may not decide that that's the right thing for your company based on the type of business you want to run. So, there are a lot of pros around the network, the people, all those sorts of things. There is the signaling of YC, which helps capital raising, but also you have to be really aware of the expectations that come with that process. Yeah.
I mean, out of curiosity, was there a pull post YC to set up more operations in the US?
So really, I think what part of the magic of YC is not telling you to do anything. I can't remember a single moment when any of the YC partners told us what to do.
Yep.
They are very good at drawing out the business problems and then helping you find the right pathway. So for us, there was no question that the US market we had to crack, because in the HR technology world, it's just the disproportionate number of major players globally are US sort of products and US companies. So for us, it was less about do we need to sort of tackle the US and more around how would you do it? What's the right first step? Those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And even then we messed it up, so it's fine.
I have a quote here actually from Vu. And I quote, "We've had big disagreements on things. We all give our counsel on what's right and wrong. Andrew has the hardest bloody job because the decisions he makes determines whether or not hundreds of people have jobs or not. I see my job as co-founders to give him as much advice as possible. But if he says black and I say white, and after giving my counsel, he still says black, I'm going to go out and tell the world it's black." Vu shared this quote about even in disagreement, you all back each other fully. Obviously there's the origination story here, but and obviously, as you said before, that these are relationships that evolve over time and you've got to put in the effort.
Yep.
But where do you think that this kind of trust comes from with you guys?
Obviously, knowing each other for a long period of time helps, but I think this applies outside of the concept of founders as well, and more broadly to the leadership team in early stage companies. Trust is best built when you're like in the trenches beside each other.
Yeah.
You're doing the late nights, trying to get this customer up and running. You're trying to solve this really difficult problem, and you're like next to each other, problem solving it with like no judgment, just trying to get through to the next thing. And so I think trust is built, and there's an element of like Australian culture in this as well. I think you do need to earn trust, and you have to earn trust by solving hard problems together. And so that comes naturally to, I think, a lot of co-founder relationships because you are constantly solving hard problems, but also it comes to senior leadership in some of these businesses as well. Like, I really optimize for things like humility in the hiring process for senior leaders, because I think it's only through having a healthy dose of humility and curiosity that you'll end up building a really strong level of trust by understanding where people are coming from, solving problems together, and you can't expect to have that trust from day one just because you have a senior title. That's actually not really how it works. Yeah.
Was hiring difficult in those early days? I mean, just given now that you've
Always
touched
difficult.
on it, always
Yeah.
that's the right response. But I mean, you know, if you look at like early versus, I guess, what you've learnt now, and I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's like sometimes early hires are different to, you know, when the company has had some form of critical mass, maybe it's a unicorn, etc. There's, you know, it's geo is very wide. You know, were there certain traits that were more important than others in those early hires?
So there's absolutely. So the early hire and the early hire phase, like scrappiness is super important.
Yeah.
And you have to actually get joy out of the process of solving problems. Like, you have to love the build journey. If you don't love the build journey, you're never going to work out at an early stage company, because it's just everything is always on fire. Whether it's this process doesn't exist and you need to build it, or you're trying to deploy this new product feature to these customers quickly, or you've got customer feedback that you want to react to and you have to do it in 24 hours to appear responsive. Whatever it is, like, everything is always broken. And so, particularly in the early stage, but even now, I think you really have to bring people on board that just enjoy the building process and the problem-solving process. And that is just so critical. As part of that, what do you optimize for? Like I've already mentioned, like humility, because you're trying to solve problems that some of which have been solved before, but some of them have not. Like kind of innate curiosity, like an intellectual ability to consume lots of data points quickly, because often you've got contrasting information sets. You know, these customers say they love this, these customers say they hate this, or our engagement data is saying this here, but there. And so information is often highly imperfect in those early years. So you have to be able to absorb lots of information points and then chart the simplest path through to action. A lot of these attributes that actually don't relate at all to experience, and they relate to kind of how you show up and what you sort of innately enjoy.
Yeah. Were you guys like very critical about culture in those early days? We speak to some founders where culture is paramount before the company's formation. Some other founders, it's an afterthought.
We've been a mix of both. And I think now, looking back on the last 9 years of the Go1 journey, I actually think this is one of my big learnings, where with the pace at which we scaled, it's not that culture didn't exist. It does exist. It exists in leadership behaviors. It exists in, your behaviors and values, how you reward and recognize. But I do think it got diluted a little bit in the scaling process. And that's one of the things I would do differently if I had my time again. Because as you're growing quickly and as processes aren't in place and those sorts of things, you are so reliant on the judgment and decisions of people at all levels of the company. And that's good because that creates speed. But you have to be so confident that the framework they're using to make decisions from a culture perspective is aligned with what you'd want to see. Otherwise, you start to veer off course and people start tripping over each other. So I would, if I had one of the lessons I would one of the things I'd do differently is be extremely rigorous on cultural discipline, from day one, not necessarily day zero, you got to figure out the product first, but, from day one. Yeah.
And I think one of the other questions I had was, obviously like leadership, culture can change, obviously it can be fluid.
It should. Yeah.
And there's also, situations where, there's senior leadership come in and out, or, sometimes strategic vision changes just because of what's happening in the market, etc.
Yeah.
And I know that you guys have obviously moved in leadership in recent years.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe talk through that, like the thought process there and the reasoning behind that as well?
Yeah. So I think, maybe culture, strategy, vision, to an extent, they'll all shift. But I think call it 70% might shift, but 30% should remain consistent. The kind of North Star of where you want the organization to be ideally will remain consistent. And I think it's been largely consistent throughout the Go1 journey. But given massive market changes, technology changes, all those sorts of things, we have had to and should, every business should, reevaluate the step and plan to get there over a period of time. And that will involve many different things. Nearly every business in the world has rewritten their product roadmap, right, with the sort of advent of Gen AI. And so that's sort of obvious and self-evident, but also like from a leadership perspective, so the US is our biggest market, but actually, is it the right cultural influence for us? And so we've had to be really thoughtful, for example, around structuring our leadership team to maintain the core cultural influence and nexus of the organization, while also getting the benefit of some of the capabilities and skills of some of the US sort of leaders. So it's like a core component, call it 30 or so percent, that should remain consistent on all of the above, and then I think you should hold strong opinions quite loosely of the rest of it. Yeah.
I want to gear shift here to one of the hot topics that founders like listening to, and that is fundraising.
Yes.
I guess the first question I always love to ask founders is, and especially ones that are very seasoned like yourself, is when you first raised that round, call it whether it was an angel or strategic, etc. Did you guys have a process in mind, or do you feel like you're winging it?
Oh, 100% winging it. Yeah. I mean, we learned a lot in the process, right? But I remember our seed round or whatever, because I technically am a lawyer, I was writing the convertible note documents for it. Yeah. And then I think for our Series A, when we got proper lawyers, they were like, what is this mess? And we had to go back and clean up a bunch of our seed stuff or whatever it is. So, no, we, of course, were winging it. But a couple of thoughts on this. One is, we always felt it was really important to do it ourselves. Yep. So we never engaged a bank or anything like that, because we just believed that it is so important that you can articulate your story and be so clear on deployment of capital and all those sorts of things that it's just something which only the founders can do. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm wrong on that, because a bunch of founders have done it other ways, but it's something which I just believe is so true to our story. The second is yes, you can look at our sort of fundraising trajectory, and there's some big numbers on that list, but man, the number of rejections we got in that process, huge.
This is in the seed,
huge.
Or just
probably a bit later, the A and the B, mostly those sorts of things. I think it was our B. I remember Andrew and I were doing all the pitching, and we spent 2 weeks in the Valley, and I can't remember exactly. I do have it written down because it was crazy. Something like 48 pitches or something like that, and 2 yeses, right? And so, you can look at our Series B and say, wasn't that a great success, right? It was a decent amount of money. It was a great investor. Microsoft ended up leading it. But it was a lot of hard work and a lot of rejection that got to that point. And the third point I make on fundraising is you have to be so thoughtful around who you take capital from. And one of the things which I'm quite proud of is that as we've moved through the capital raising process is we're focused on, at the seed round, that's just, early stage individuals or small funds that have been there, done that. They understand the seed journey. Our Series A was led by Seek, jobs, skills nexus, very sort of close tie there in terms of experience base. Then Series B was Microsoft, which distribution, right? Salesforce Ventures is also on our cap table. Again, sort of distribution plays for us. Moving into then growth, scale, VC with SoftBank and others into sort of the most recent rounds. So being really intentional around what you're solving for per round, I think is so helpful, because hopefully these people are on your cap table for 10 years plus, right? And so you want to be really careful and thoughtful on how you build the right team around you. Yeah.
I guess you did the lead up, so I'll take it. How do you actually manage rejection?
Apart from crying? Yeah. I mean, I think this is actually one of the core founder traits, right?
Yeah.
I'm yet to see a successful founder who does not have resilience in bucket loads, right? Yeah, sure, it was just our Series B had a 40-something rejections for our capital raise, but the amount of times we've lost customer deals or the product didn't meet customer expectations in the early days, or a senior leadership hire hasn't worked out, and you've got to like have that conversation, and that feels very rejecting for both parties. It is a proper lesson in resilience and just getting knocked down and getting back up again for a decade.
I do want to ask as well, because, we're in Brisbane, as I mentioned, and I've been speaking to founders this week. Being from Brisbane as well, love to see Brisbane founders have success on a global stage, and talking to them and trying to educate them about, running that first fundraising process and discussions around how we choose investors, etc. And you guys, I believe, had like an early government grant program.
We did, yeah. I think it was the Business Development Fund or something like that.
And I guess maybe a question around that is how did that come about? Did you see that as beneficial? Do you think that is also a potential option for early stage founders as well?
Yeah, so we've actually been, I think, the recipient of 2 government grant programs. Yep. One was the Ignite Ideas Fund, which is a small amount of money in a grant form for the establishment of product ideas. I don't believe it exists anymore, but it may still do. And then the QBDF, the Business Development Fund, which was the matching fund where the government would match new capital coming into the business from sort of other investors. And I think I would say both of those were helpful for the business, but none were definitive in terms of our trajectory. And so they were helpful because they were not particularly time consuming and didn't require an intense deviation in product work, product roadmap, commercial work, and relationships, and those sorts of things. So I think those types of programs can be an extra boost. But I think still it's somewhat difficult to sort of intentionally and strategically focus on those only. I would be keeping them in their orbit and, where they come up. Don't be afraid to pursue them, but I still think they're adjacent to the core capital requirements of the business, and also the core experience you will want around the table to help grow your company further. Yeah.
We were just talking off camera as well about what's happening in the macro world. A lot of shifting and changing, it seems, every night at the moment. And I wanted to ask you this just because of the tenure, right, of how long you guys have been around for. But how do you think through raising or even managing capital through changing market cycles and economic shifts? Do you think through that at all?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is one of the elements of, I think, sort of maturing as the organization has progressed. When you're small and there's a small seed round, you kind of have no choice, right? To a degree, you have to get the product out to market, you have to get customers, and you have to use it to get the company from 0 to 1. And there's some decisions you can make along that trajectory, but give or take, you've got to use the cash for something like that. As we got into our mid and later rounds, though, we very intentionally sort of adopted a fundraising strategy which had a business plan to get us to cash flow positive before the end of that capital. So therefore, we had optionality if we did want to do something big, go into a new market, build a new product, blah, 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 to be able to raise again, but never wanted to be in a position where we had to raise. And thankfully, I think that's put us in a pretty good position at the moment, with the markets in a pretty turbulent environment, are still having the majority of the capital from our last capital raise, and being disciplined in our execution against that business plan to make sure we're not spending too much of it until we have strategic bets that we will want to place in the next phase of growth.
Let's shift to product. Not a loaded question, I promise. Is product market fit real?
So I think probably the honest answer is it wasn't for us.
Yep.
Again, I can't speak to the universe of technology companies out there, but there wasn't a moment where you'd be like, oh my gosh,
this is it.
Every company needs this, and we've got it, guys. We can now retire and boots up. No, we have and still are we're evolving our product on an incredibly regular basis. We have done more product releases in the past 3 months than we did in the year beforehand, because the tech landscape is shifting again, and you've got to accelerate. You've got no choice but to accelerate at the moment. And so I don't think there was a single moment that I could turn to and say, okay, this is where we've got product market fit. It's just a constant evolution, and you should never be satisfied. I do think, though, one thing which was critical to our journey, which has really helped us, was actually thinking about distribution, probably as much as we think about product. Because depending on what ecosystem you're operating in, the channels by which you reach customers will make or break your business. And certainly, I think one of the things we did right was think about that a lot from very early in the business history.
And let's double click on that. Is that like, are we talking partnerships here? You've already kind of mentioned around like how specific strategic investors can help you with distribution potentially.
Yeah.
But from like maybe a product or partnership standpoint, what are
100%.
some examples of
Yeah.
that?
So if you think about our business, and so we operate in the HR tech space,
Yep.
which is a busy universe of everyone from like payroll providers to performance management systems to HRISs to,
Yep.
There's, 4 to 6 main categories. And the connective tissue for us into that ecosystem to help people be able to learn wherever they are and not try and rip them out into yet another learning management system or something like that has been critical to growth, because we have been able to leverage the customer books and access the customer books of these much larger HR technology players and deliver value through them to their customers, which has contributed the majority of our revenue growth over the last 4 or 5 years of the business. I think it would have been a much slower story if we were trying to do purely a direct sales playbook, for example, where we have our outbound SDR team making calls and all those sorts of things. So how you reach customers is, from my perspective, equally as important a decision as the product that you're building.
How do you think through localization? Obviously, that's probably been a key topic for you guys over the years as the geo mandate's gone wider and wider. But how do you think through that?
So for us, it is both complexity and a moat. And I suspect that's the same for most businesses. And the speed at which you push from a localization perspective either can build a really amazing defensive moat around what you're doing, or it can add a bunch of overheads and complexity to the organization from a time zone and customization perspective. And so I personally am a big fan of international markets and localization. It's been a big part of our journey, whether it's localizing the learning content, finding the right HR technology partners in local markets to partner with, all those sorts of things. It's been a consistent and big lever for us, but it also has created complexity in our business, multiple time zones very early on. I think we've got employees in 20 countries, right? And for the size of business we are, that is disproportionately high. And so you're managing multiple time zones, multiple work cultures, all those sorts of things. So for us, it's been a really big part of the story, but I wouldn't blindly say to a founder, got to go in 3 new markets by next year because, you'll miss out on those markets. You have to actually really consider the pros and cons that it brings and work out, is it the right decision for your product? Yeah.
But before we shift off product, I mean, it's probably good for the listener to hear, I guess, how you guys define an MVP and what does actually the product architecture of Go1 look like today?
Yeah. So MVP and like, how do we think about
the earliest viable product that you guys were shipping to customers?
Yeah,
that was
very early.
Very early to like the beast it is today.
Yeah. Okay. So this has been a, I guess, evolving story for us as well.
Yeah.
And so we have this core sort of like cultural pillar, which is called like velocity and pragmatism, right? Velocity and speed is, I think, in and of itself a competitive advantage these days. And you can see the founders and the companies that are embodying that and really capitalizing on that versus others. And so I like fundamentally believe in this current environment, both economic and technology, speed is actually a competitive advantage. So we have this like principle of velocity and pragmatism, which has been in the company for a long time, but it's really been enshrined, I'd say, in the last 2 years as we've gone through some of the turbulent market cycles, which is, it is far better to deploy something, learn firsthand feedback, and then move quickly to iterate than it is to spend a ton of time even on like user research and all those sorts of things. So we very much embody the kind of painted door theory. Okay, right now we're thinking of releasing a new product and we're not quite sure whether it will work. The way we're testing that is we're putting a fake button in our product, which is like, click here to try the new product, and we're measuring how many people click on it.
Yeah.
And that's the most important signal versus, I don't know, spending a bunch of money on user research.
Yeah.
No, we just want to know how many of our
love that.
customers will click the button.
That's amazing.
And that's, like, from my perspective, a much stronger signal of, like, should we spend time building this than, user research and feedback groups and all those sorts of things.
And I guess a question to that is, how have you guys would have seen the ecosystem evolve over the last 10 years, and there's it's not apples to apples, but there's the Slacks of the world, there's like the Monday.com, there's
sure.
Workday, etc. How have you guys, and maybe like you don't think this way, but it's like, how do you think through navigating this whole ecosystem, whether it's like competitor, comparable, partner, etc.?
Yeah, so great question. And I actually think this question will become far more relevant to more and more businesses in a world of agentic AI, right? So there is a specific reason why in our industry it's an incredibly important question, but I think it will become more broad-based over time as well. So, the principle at the heart of it for us is that kind of partnerships and collaboration has been fundamental to our success. For really a key principle that, like, we believe learning happens and should happen and happens more effectively in environments that people already operate in. Like, if you're in Slack and your mate recommends you this bit of content or this book or whatever it is, this course, you're far more likely to do it if you can just do it than like it redirect you out to some third-party system and you have to look up your password again or SSO with two-factor authentication or whatever, and like we've lost you by then.
Yeah.
So because we believe in the principle that most learning happens in like the flow of work, it's never been a question for us. Like, we have had to exist where learners are while still maintaining a strong set of product principles and decisions that mean that we can still deliver good experiences within those ecosystems. Things like recommendations, understanding the learner well enough to surface the right thing for them to do next. Things that if we compromised on, and where we have compromised on them in the past, it degrades the learner experience and ultimately their view of the product quality. So for us, it was never really a question because of the ecosystem that we operate in and how we think about learning. But as I said, I think it's going to become a question that's going to become much more broad-based in the next period, because you're going to have AI agents running around everywhere, and ultimately interfaces will change a lot. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to commercialization. Just for the listeners, let's just give a refresher on how Go1 makes money.
Yeah, sure. So we are you can think of it as a traditional B2B SaaS model. So we have a Netflix-like subscription for compliance and professional development, so content and pathways. So a business subscribes to us for their employee base, for either compliance or professional development use case. And then, we have annual recurring revenue that comes off the back of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
How did you think through, and this is a question that we get all the time, and we actually started doing a number of these recordings, probably about 10, and then we realized we were missing this one key topic that founders love: pricing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of founders spend a lot of time mentally destroying themselves in the early years over this topic. But how did you guys think through that in the early years?
So we also agonized over it.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is there is no answer.
Yeah.
You can spend a year thinking about it, and it's nearly as good as throwing a dart at a dartboard. Like, it may be incrementally better than throwing a dart at a dartboard, but not that much better. And you saw this play out just recently, right? Didn't Sam Altman just say that they priced their ChatGPT Pro subscription for $200 or whatever?
Yep.
Why did you do that? That seems about right. Yeah. And so, again, going back to first principles and live data, I just get it done and get it out. And also don't undersell the value. I think we did this in the early days. I think we were guilty of this, of pricing too low to try and win deals. And that's good because you get traction and customers and all those sorts of things. But I do think there were times where we could have kept price integrity a lot more, and we would have still won, but we didn't feel like we had the confidence or traction or those sorts of things to justify it. And we're still learning this lesson. We did a price increase, call it 2 years ago or something like that, and no one blinked. I don't think we lost a single customer over it. And so what does that tell you?
Yeah.
We're still delivering value, which is viewed as, above and beyond the price that we're charging in a lot of cases. So we're still learning this lesson. Yeah.
And if One thing we were talking about before we got on air was around actually Matt from Schedulo, about how Schedulo navigated like the COVID era. And I think you guys had like similar things during COVID as well. I'd love to like touch on that, but also kind of just ask whether there were specific, I put it, milestones in the trajectory of Go1 that were like moments of, I guess, inflection. I know the term inflection gets thrown around way too much, especially in VC landscape. Yeah. But, if you could look back on the time thus far, like, what are some key moments where you're like, wow, that was a pivotal moment for Go1 in a positive sense?
So I think there aren't too many of them actually. And I think that's reflects more of, the constant dissatisfaction with the status quo. So I look back, there are obviously things that I look back on fondly and are like, okay, this was really important. Our YC experience was one. Our first channel partner and distribution partner arrangement that we sort of cemented, which then catalyzed a new go-to-market strategy for us, which has been really impactful. I think our first sort of major acquisition, which was a French company, which it's just been like a joy to work with and to, go through that process with. So you can certainly look back and say there are these things that were really important. And I think it's easy to, in retrospect, map them out in some really clear timeline. But the reality is it's been a constant problem-solving journey. Yeah. And at the time, you may not even realize. Like, I didn't realize that YC would be so impactful. I didn't realize this first channel partner would be so impactful. It was just, we think this is probably the right thing to do. Let's like try and get them signed, blah, blah, blah. And you don't even clock at the time. You're like, you just try to solve the problem. And then it's only maybe 2-3 years later, you're like, actually that changed sort of the structure of the business. Yeah.
As we start to wind up, I guess one of my questions to you is, and this journey has been a long one, I guess, in comparison to some of the other guests that we've had on the
9 years
podcast.
Now.
Yeah. What are you excited about next?
So much. Yeah. So much. Yeah. So I think this is actually a really special time to be building organizations and companies. And I feel actually pretty privileged to be doing so. Primarily because of the massive shift in the technology landscape that's happening underneath us. And if you can accelerate with that, and the world of learning is going to look fundamentally different for my son, who's 3, than it did for me. And the opportunity to help shape that and to be a part of that, I can't ask for many challenges that I think are more exciting. Coupling that with, I think, some of the lessons that I've learned around like leadership and company building, particularly around culture and those types of things, I think you combine those elements, the technology landscape that's changing, the right sort of cultural principles to allow people to move quickly against that, and a now fairly sizable customer book, tens of millions of learners, which gives us a pretty good insight into like what's happening, what people are learning, why they're learning it, those sorts of things. And I think there's some really, really cool stuff that's going to happen in the next couple of years that we'll be a part of. Yeah.
Final question. And I feel like you've done some really incredible reflections today, so thank you. But any parting words for early stage founders that are listening, or even like words to yourself if you were to go back and look at the person that was about to found Go1?
Yeah. There's a few. Yeah. So maybe, first of all, it's going to be hard. Even if you're wildly successful, it's going to be harder than you've ever would imagine it's going to be. And so how do you get through that? It kind of comes back to a couple of the thematics and the questions which you've asked, which is, it's a massive cliche, but I'm a big believer that I think it's the old adage that, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or something like that. Mm. And I believe that is so true. And so all you have to do is ensure that you have 4 or 5 people around you. They could be mentors. Mentors have played a big role in some of my big moments at Go1. They could be co-founders. They could be early seed stage investors who will be with you for 10 years, and you need to have vulnerable, authentic conversations with them. Or they could just be really close friends who have no idea about what you're doing, but will happily have a wine or a beer with you after a hard day. Just get 4 or 5 people around you that will have your back, and you'll be fine, because you have to normalize the highs and the lows and get through both of them. As long as you've got that, like, you'll be fine.
Awesome. Chris, thanks for joining us on The First.
Pleasure.